When Marvel Studios stunned fans by announcing that Ryan Reynolds was out, it felt bigger than an endgame twist. In Hollywood, where A-list stars are treated like royalty, the idea that one of the industry's most bankable names could suddenly be cut loose was almost unthinkable. But his exit wasn't random. It came in the shadow of explosive receipts dropped by filmmaker Justin Baldoni. And here's the twist. This wasn't just about Ryan. It tied directly to his wife, Blake Lively, and a messy feud that's become one of the most shocking Hollywood scandals in years. The million-dollar question: how did Ryan, a cornerstone of Marvel's future, suddenly find himself on the chopping block? At first, the drama seemed like a typical behind-the-scenes clash. Blake Lively, cast in a major role for Baldoni's adaptation of a beloved novel, reportedly grew frustrated as Baldoni wore too many hats, directing, co-writing, and even acting in the film. Whispers of tension grew into full-blown rumors when Blake accused him of undermining her and pushing narratives that painted her as difficult. Social media rallied around her, and the press amplified the story. Another woman in Hollywood being unfairly branded as hard to work with. But then Baldoni's team dropped the receipts. Leaked texts painted a very different picture, one where Blake wasn't a victim at all, but a power player pulling strings behind the scenes. The messages revealed her dictating script changes, steering marketing strategies, and even referencing her dragons, a clear nod to her powerful industry allies, Ryan included. And Ryan's silence didn't last long. New leaks directly implicated him, showing he wasn't just aware of the maneuvering, he was actively participating. Private calls with Hollywood insiders, PR strategies to shift blame onto Baldoni, and tactical media leaks all pointed to Reynolds as a co-conspirator. For a man whose career had been built on charm, wit, and the reputation of Hollywood's good guy, the revelations were devastating. Then came the bombshell. Baldoni revealed he had even more airtight evidence, time-stamped messages, verifiable communications that tied Ryan to a deliberate smear campaign. This wasn't just about defending Blake, it was about flipping the entire narrative in her favor, casting her as a wronged star while making Baldoni the villain. Marvel panicked. Ryan wasn't just another actor, he was central to the MCU's future, his comedic timing woven into the DNA of the franchise. But executives couldn't ignore the optics. Protecting Reynolds despite undeniable proof of manipulation and sabotage risked alienating fans, collaborators, and even other cast members. According to insiders, Marvel's emergency meeting to review the evidence sealed his fate. The receipts were reportedly so damning that executives had no choice. Ryan Reynolds, the golden boy of comedy and Marvel's most reliable box office draw, was out. And that's when the story took an even darker turn. Whispers began to spread that the leaks hinted at something much bigger. A long-running pattern in which Ryan and Blake had allegedly leveraged their influence to shape opportunities, silence competition, and position themselves at the top of Hollywood's power pyramid. What began as a single messy creative clash was suddenly reframed as something deeper, a full-blown power play exposed in real time. The scandal that erupted shook not only Hollywood, but also the very foundation of Marvel's empire, sending shockwaves across the entertainment industry in ways few had ever imagined possible. For years, Marvel had been known as the most disciplined and carefully controlled studio in the business, a powerhouse that thrived on secrecy, precision, and the cultivation of larger-than-life heroes both on and off the screen. The studio's stars were treated not only as actors, but as cultural icons, ambassadors of an interconnected universe that fans cherished like a religion. Yet in a single unprecedented move, Marvel severed ties with Ryan Reynolds, one of its most bankable and beloved figures, a decision so seismic that industry veterans compared it to watching a superhero vanish mid-battle without explanation. For fans who had followed the Marvel Cinematic Universe with near-religious devotion, the shock was indescribable. It wasn't just about losing an actor. It was about losing an identity that had been meticulously woven into the DNA of Marvel's storytelling machine. What made this all the more astonishing was the bluntness of Marvel's official announcement. Studios of this scale typically operate with polished corporate spin, carefully worded statements designed to minimize fallout while protecting the brand. But Marvel didn't bother with gentle phrasing or vague reassurances this time. The statement was sharp, direct, and final, citing a review of newly disclosed evidence that made Ryan's continued involvement untenable. That word, untenable, carried the weight of finality, a tone rarely, if ever, used in Hollywood's PR playbook. It was not a gentle parting of ways. It was exile. The studio effectively drew a line in the sand, signaling to fans, industry insiders, and rival executives that something far darker had been uncovered behind the scenes, something too damaging to ignore, even for a star of Ryan Reynolds' magnitude. And the bluntness of that decision told everyone exactly how high the stakes had become. As the internet digested the news, social media erupted into chaos. Twitter feeds lit up with disbelief. TikTok creators speculated in real time, and Reddit threads exploded with theories ranging from corporate betrayal to unthinkable conspiracies. Fans were desperate for answers. How could a man whose reputation had been carefully cultivated as Hollywood's golden boy, a charming, witty figure beloved by nearly every demographic, suddenly be cast out by the very studio that had once considered him indispensable? Ryan Reynolds wasn't just another actor. He was a brand, a cultural symbol of comedic brilliance mixed with heartfelt relatability, a performer who could sell tickets across continents. His name was synonymous with success. So how could Marvel, a studio that had always put profitability above all else, willingly walk away from him? The only explanation was that the evidence Justin Baldoni had revealed was so damning, so undeniable, that even Marvel's immense machinery of damage control couldn't spin it into something survivable. The calculated silence from Ryan's side only added fuel to the fire. For years, he had built a reputation as a master of diffusing controversy with humor. Whether it was a minor on-set mishap, a cheeky jab at fellow stars, or even a hint of backlash against his films, Ryan could flip the narrative with a single tweet, a perfectly timed meme, or a sarcastic Instagram post. Fans adored this ability, interpreting it as proof that he was genuine, approachable, and in control. But this time he said nothing. His feeds carried on with generic promotions, scheduled ads, and irrelevant updates as though the biggest scandal of his career wasn't consuming headlines around the world. And that silence was deafening. For once, Ryan's charm and humor failed him. People weren't laughing. They were waiting. They wanted accountability, clarity, or at least acknowledgement. But instead, all they saw was a man cornered, retreating behind a wall of rehearsed, meaningless posts. And the longer he stayed silent, the worse it looked. Meanwhile, Justin Baldoni's strategy was the polar opposite. Rather than gloating or throwing shade, Baldoni doubled down with precision. He released even more receipts, carefully curated logs, emails, and messages that mapped out a timeline so detailed that the public could trace the unfolding of events step by step. Unlike vague accusations, this evidence was specific, time-stamped, and corroborated by multiple sources. It painted a devastating picture of calculated manipulation, with Ryan and Blake Lively not just passively involved, but actively working behind the scenes to shape narratives, leak damaging stories, and undermine Baldoni's credibility as a director. What made these revelations even more explosive was Baldoni's framing. He wasn't positioning himself as a victim seeking revenge. Instead, he presented himself as a man defending his integrity and protecting the creative team that had been caught in the crossfire. His calm, measured tone in the face of chaos contrasted sharply with Ryan's silence and Blake's growing absence from the public eye, making him appear steady and trustworthy at a time when the others seemed evasive and defensive. The impact was immediate. The narrative flipped once again, this time leaving Ryan and Blake with no corner to retreat to. Blake, once admired for her radiant social media presence and carefully curated glimpses of a seemingly perfect family life, vanished into silence. Her feeds went dark, a dramatic shift from the bubbly, charismatic personality fans were accustomed to. And when her attorney abruptly withdrew from her case, citing irreconcilable differences over her version of events, the internet erupted with speculation. Was Blake the true mastermind orchestrating the smear campaign against Baldoni? Had she pressured Ryan into stepping in, dragging his career into the line of fire? Or were they both equally complicit, running a carefully choreographed strategy to dominate Hollywood narratives? The theories grew wilder by the hour, with even their marriage suddenly being re-evaluated under the harsh light of scandal. Were Ryan and Blake truly the picture-perfect power couple they had always appeared to be? Or had their relationship always been as strategic as their careers? An exercise in branding, image control, and influence rather than genuine partnership? No one had concrete answers, but the perception was shifting rapidly, and it was not in their favor. What made this entire saga so compelling was the sense that it wasn't just about one movie, one feud, or even one scandal. It was about Hollywood's dirty little secret finally spilling into the open. The way power couples, Agents and studios manipulated narratives behind closed doors, shaping coverage, spinning controversies, and protecting reputations at all costs. Crew members who had worked on the film began whispering about how minor on-set disagreements had been exaggerated, twisted, and then leaked to gossip outlets in ways that seemed too deliberate to be coincidence. These weren't natural conflicts blown out of proportion. They were tactical moves, part of a larger campaign to discredit Baldoni and consolidate control over the project. And now, with receipts circulating, those whispers gained credibility. The manipulation was no longer speculation, it was documented. Marvel's decision to cut Ryan wasn't just about punishing one actor. It was about protecting their brand from being tainted by association with manipulation and sabotage. For a studio whose entire empire relied on trust, loyalty, and the illusion of unity, the idea that one of its stars had been exposed as a behind-the-scenes saboteur was too dangerous to ignore. Marvel had built its empire on the idea that audiences weren't just watching actors, they were watching heroes. The studio understood better than anyone that reputation was currency, and once that currency was corrupted, it could bring the entire system crashing down. In that light, their decision to exile Ryan wasn't extreme, it was survival. Yet the fallout was more than just professional. It was cultural. Fans began reevaluating everything they thought they knew about Ryan Reynolds. The man who had once seemed untouchable, universally adored, suddenly looked flawed, manipulative, and silent when it mattered most. Blake, too, went from being a relatable figure of grace and charm to someone entangled in a web of manipulation that no amount of curated Instagram posts could repair. Their brand, once a beacon of aspirational Hollywood love and wit, now seemed like a carefully constructed facade cracking under pressure. For many, it was a brutal reminder that in Hollywood, nothing is as perfect as it seems, and the heroes we worship on screen are often just as messy, flawed, and calculating as anyone else, if not more so. As the dust settled, Hollywood itself split into divided camps. Some insiders criticized Marvel's swift, decisive move as an overreaction, arguing that the scandal could have been contained with traditional PR strategies, a carefully crafted apology, and some time out of the spotlight. After all, wasn't Ryan Reynolds too valuable to lose? Couldn't his star power outweigh the fallout? But others applauded Marvel's stand, seeing it as a long overdue reckoning for an industry that had allowed powerful figures to manipulate narratives unchecked for far too long. And if Ryan truly had orchestrated or participated in a smear campaign against a respected director, then perhaps this wasn't just another Hollywood spat. Perhaps it was a line in the sand, a test of whether accountability could finally penetrate the walls of power that had shielded stars for decades. What had begun as a seemingly familiar Hollywood narrative, an ambitious female star being subtly undermined by a powerful male director, spiraled into something far more intricate and unsettling. The story twisted into unexpected shapes, revealing layers of manipulation and orchestration so sophisticated that even the most cynical media observers admitted they hadn't anticipated this scale of behind-the-scenes maneuvering. Suddenly, the entertainment press, late-night talk shows, and online creators weren't simply recapping another tabloid scandal. They were dissecting the anatomy of a cultural earthquake. Everywhere, the same electrified question buzzed. Could Ryan Reynolds, Hollywood's golden boy, the charming, self-deprecating, universally adored figure, actually survive this? Or had his seemingly unshakable brand finally absorbed a wound too deep to ever recover from? Marvel Studios, the powerhouse that had built its reputation on meticulous planning, airtight secrecy, and fostering almost family-like bonds with its actors, suddenly found itself at the center of a messy and very public rupture. For years, Marvel had shielded its stars through everything: contract disputes, creative disagreements, even personal controversies, because its empire thrived on continuity, stability, and loyalty. Yet here it was, engaged in a very public, almost surgical separation from one of its brightest stars. Some insiders whispered about redemption arcs, reminding everyone that Hollywood had always been strangely forgiving, that audiences loved a fallen celebrity clawing their way back to relevance. But others weren't so convinced. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist or a suspension from the spotlight. This was scorched earth. The headlines were relentless, the leaks unending, and the firestorm growing too big for Marvel, or Ryan himself, to contain. Every new document, every damning screenshot widened the rift. Industry experts began warning that this wasn't just another disposable scandal designed to entertain gossip-hungry fans. It was, in their words, a genuine turning point, the kind of event that forces an industry to stop, reassess, and recalibrate its entire ecosystem. Rival studios, which had been quietly developing projects with Ryan attached, suddenly panicked. Executives held emergency calls behind closed doors. How many films in development now looked radioactive simply because Ryan's name was on them? How many directors, investors, and actors were suddenly at risk of being dragged into a storm they hadn't asked for? Deals that once looked like guaranteed gold were abruptly suspended, quietly rewritten, or shelved entirely. Ryan's charisma, which had once been the safest bet in Hollywood, now looked like a liability, a volatile variable no studio wanted near its billion-dollar investments. The whispers grew louder. Ryan Reynolds, the man who had built an entire career out of likability, his boyish charm, his self-aware humor, his constant ability to laugh at himself, was now stripped of his greatest shield. In the past, whenever criticism arose, his relatability had carried him through. But this wasn't just a PR misstep, nor was it a bad review, an underperforming film, or an awkward interview moment. This was bigger, deeper, and more dangerous. This was sabotage exposed in the rawest way possible. For years, fans had looked at Ryan as Hollywood's everyman, the guy you could imagine having a beer with, the actor who seemed to exist just slightly outside of the industry's plastic sheen. But when the receipts emerged, concrete, time-stamped evidence that painted a picture of calculated backroom manipulation, fans were forced to confront an ugly truth. Behind the jokes and affable persona lurked something colder, more ruthless. For many, the illusion shattered instantly. And yet, while Ryan retreated into silence, Justin Baldoni demonstrated a masterclass in composure. He refused to let the noise dictate his story. While blogs and YouTubers salivated over the drama, Baldoni quietly and repeatedly redirected attention back to the project that had started all of this, the film itself. He reminded audiences that at its core, this wasn't about gossip, smear campaigns, or broken contracts. It was about art. It was about the emotional themes of a beloved novel he had poured himself into adapting. And in choosing not to play the victim or the avenger, Baldoni made a strategic move. He let the evidence, the receipts, speak louder than any statement he could deliver. The facts became his armor, his credibility shield, and they did what PR spin could not. They cut straight through manipulation. In a world of noise, silence paired with proof became more powerful than outrage. Marvel's decision to sever ties with Ryan added an unmistakable exclamation point. It wasn't framed as a negotiation, nor softened with euphemisms. There were no vague promises of ongoing conversations or mutual reevaluations of creative partnerships. Marvel's statement was clean, sharp, and brutal. Ryan's involvement was no longer tenable. For a studio that had always prized discretion, this bluntness shocked even hardened insiders. It told the world that whatever they had uncovered was undeniable. Marvel, the most profitable and brand-conscious studio in Hollywood history, had decided the cost of keeping Ryan was greater than the astronomical losses they'd incur without him. And when Marvel draws that line, you know the evidence must be catastrophic. The fallout was immediate. Scrapping projects, rewriting long-term franchise arcs, and recasting iconic roles were all on the table. Financial analysts estimated losses that ran into hundreds of millions, but Marvel seemed unfazed. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about survival. Once trust between a studio and its stars is broken at this level, patching it up is rarely worth the cost. Marvel, more than anyone, understood that keeping Ryan would mean gambling with the audience's faith. And faith is the bedrock on which their entire cinematic empire rests. Better to amputate the limb than let the infection spread. Still, one massive question loomed over fans and insiders alike. Who would replace Ryan Reynolds? Recasting a character mid-franchise is notoriously risky. Audiences grow fiercely attached to the actors who embody their heroes, and midstream changes often collapse under the weight of expectations. Ryan wasn't just another cog in Marvel's machine. He was woven into its DNA, central to storylines that stretched years into the future. Now, Marvel faced the Herculean task of rewriting its own destiny, while millions of fans dissected every rumor and leak about his replacement. The challenge wasn't just about finding another actor. It was about convincing audiences to trust again, to believe in a story whose central thread had just been torn apart. Meanwhile, Baldoni's film moved forward under the strangest of spotlights. With Ryan gone, curiosity about the project itself ballooned. For some, the scandal made the film irresistible. Scandal sells, after all, and audiences often find themselves drawn to projects wrapped in controversy, even when they insist otherwise. Cynics speculated the drama might even boost ticket sales, creating a morbid curiosity that marketing budgets could never manufacture. But Baldoni refused to capitalize on Ryan's downfall. His refusal to turn Marvel's decision into a promotional hook only elevated him further in the eyes of many. He seemed steady, resolute, a filmmaker who wanted his work judged on its own merits, not through the distorted lens of Hollywood's ugliest feud. That restraint only sharpened the contrast with Ryan, who remained silent, absent, his carefully polished social media charm machine sputtering out just when he needed it most. For years, Ryan had been a master of deflecting criticism with humor, flipping narratives with a meme or a perfectly timed joke. Now the silence felt damning. Would he eventually issue a sweeping apology, insisting the leaks were misinterpreted or taken out of context? Would he lean into a redemption arc, as other disgraced stars had done before him? Or would he attempt the unthinkable, a reconciliation with Marvel down the road? Given the way Marvel handled this scandal, the last option seemed impossible. This was not a studio that left doors cracked open. The evidence had left no room for doubt. And so while Ryan's career drifted in limbo, Baldoni's reputation soared. He hadn't gloated. He hadn't spiked the football. He hadn't allowed bitterness or smugness to color his words. Instead, he let the receipts, and only the receipts, do the talking. That choice exposed something deeper about Hollywood than any scandal sheet could have: the immense danger of narrative manipulation. For decades, carefully spun PR strategies had been the shield of stars and studios alike. But in an age where screenshots, text logs, and emails live forever, the power of those narratives has been shattered. Transparency, even when messy, has become the most effective weapon against manipulation. Ryan Reynolds' downfall proves a brutal truth. No star, no matter how bulletproof their persona, is immune to collapse. He had been Marvel's golden boy. Fans adored his wit. Executives built billion-dollar plans around his charisma. For years, he seemed untouchable, a fixture of Hollywood's A-list that no one could imagine falling. Yet behind the humor, behind the charming interviews and viral jokes, was a more complicated reality, one that collapsed the moment the receipts hit daylight. His plunge from Marvel's central pillar to Hollywood's newest pariah left an industry rattled. If someone as beloved as Ryan Reynolds could be cut loose overnight, what did untouchable even mean anymore?